Okay, welcome coders, welcome to this channel. What I'm going to try to do in this video is by the end of it give you an idea of what is DevOps and what is full stack. You might hear these terms all the time. I'm not going to give you I'm going to give you my take on them. So there could be some controversy with this video. I might get comments, that's not what DevOps is. That's not what I'm going to tell you what I think it is and what I answer in interviews. Are you full stack? Are you DevOps? What is it? What is this stuff that we're doing? All right. In my own opinion, without script. All right. I'm going to speak from the heart straight to you. All right. I am a developer. I started in developing. I did VB6 way back in the early 2000s. That evolved into .NET, and almost everything I did was .NET. It was development. We were building things. Mostly we were building websites. I worked for Allstate up in Chicago area, and we built the first online quote system where you could go and get a car quote. And it was web pages, it was middle tier, and it was a database. Okay, so when .NET came around, it was a big deal, and the company I was with said .NET is going to be it. So the very first project I got was a ASP.NET C# project. It was a failed offshore project that they brought to us to fix. And so what did I have to know? I had to learn C#. That is the middle tier. That's the code, the logic. I had to learn ASP.NET, the front end, HTML. Middle tier was C# code that did logic. The UI is the front end. The logic is the C# code in the middle, and the SQL Server was the database in the back end. So that's what you would call full stack. I knew the front end, I knew the middle part, the coding, and then the back end was the database where you store things. So think about how a web page works. Imagine you have a form. Someone brings up a form on a web page like you're seeing right here, and you type in your first name, last name, and everything. That's the front end. They hit submit, and there's some code in the middle. That's what we do as developers. We take that first name, last name, and we might decide, okay, if you're in this state, if from Illinois, then do this. If from Missouri, then do this. There might be some logic there, like show them this page, take them to this page, show them. So if they're from this state after they enter this form, you might take them to a different place as opposed to if they're from this state. So you're doing logic. Now on the far end and the back end is what you have is a database. Now it's a lot more complex than that, but the database, the point of that is to store data about the user. So if you have a login, if you log in on the front end with the username and password, that has to be stored somewhere so it can be retrieved later. So it would go through the steps and be stored on a database. So the next time you log in, it would check to see if you were in. So if someone says you are a full stack developer, to me, what that means is you're not just the front end guy. You're not just a UI guy. You're not just the middle guy. And you're not just a database guy. You're everything. You could build an entire website, what I just described, all of it by yourself. So when someone says you're full stack, to me, what that means is you know databases, you know coding, and you know UI. And you don't have to know anything specific. It's just a general term that says you know how things work front to end. And it doesn't have to be web pages. Now, this is just my example. It could be some other kind of user interface form, okay? It could be like a Windows form, or it could be an app on Linux or something. But it doesn't matter. There's always a user interface, there's some logic, and then there's storage. It's kind of like a 3-tier thing. It's more complex than that. So a full stack person to me means you can do them all. So there's people out there that just know front end. I've worked with graphics guys, and they're really, really good at making images and doing UI stuff, and they make the pretty screens that kind of fade and all that stuff. I don't do that really. I can make basic pages, but you would get a graphics guy or a girl if you wanted to create a really pretty looking website. I do functional websites, like I do lots of logic, and that's what companies need. So a graphics guy might not know the middle tier and the end tier, and he would not be full stack, that person. There are database administrators. That's all they do is database. They would not be full stack. They don't know coding front to end. Now, am I a DBA? Am I super good at databases? I'm pretty good, but I wouldn't call myself a DBA. I say that in interviews. They say, how well do you know SQL Server? I say I have a developer's knowledge of SQL Server. I can do inserts, updates, deletes. I can design tables. I can design all kinds of table models and things like that. and I can store, I can, do all kinds of queries and things like that. But there's still another level of knowledge that I don't really have, and I'm actually not interested in. I find databases to be boring, really. But there's people that specialize in databases, and that might mean like creating indexes and creating backups of tables and creating automated scripts and taking queries that are not efficient and making them very efficient. So the queries I write might not be the most efficient in the world. I kind of know how to make things efficient, like not calling more stuff than you need and stuff, but a really good database guy could look at a query and say, this is not efficient as it could be, and they would change it and stuff like that. So I have a developer's knowledge. I am full stack. I say that and what that means to me is I know front to end. Okay, that's the definition of full stack. Now, over time, and especially recently, things have changed. It's that model doesn't really work anymore. And so let's talk about DevOps right now. I started realizing what I'm doing at the current moment is called DevOps. And I don't want to give anything away because my company stuff is private, but more and more what I do requires both that I understand coding and software, but also operations. So I defined what is a developer dev part of it. What is operations? So if you were to Google, what is IT operations? The gist of it is there's these people generally that handle servers. They sit in a different area than the developers. Developers build websites, they build web pages, they do logic and code. Operations people handle the servers, Internet Information Server. They're doing more and more in Amazon Web Services. They do a lot in Amazon Web Services, and I want to talk about that in a minute. But operations people handle the computers and the servers and the web servers and all the infrastructure that the developers' code sits on. Okay, so you can have a web page, but it needs to go somewhere. It needs to be deployed somewhere so people can use it. And it needs to be deployed in different stages. Usually there's development, there's stage, there's QA, and then there's production. So your website or whatever it is, your product you're working on moves through stages for quality control. You don't just take what you did and just throw it out there because it might not be good. You got to test it first. Often the operations people will handle the server. So they're doing the infrastructure stuff. Okay, so things have kind of changed with Amazon Web Services. Now, Amazon has revolutionized the way we use servers and computers. I want to know more and more and more about AWS because it's becoming more and more. It's not the only service out there that does this, but it's the leader right now. And it has over 244 products. It is a gigantic operation. And I really believe it's the next biggest, hottest thing, because we're going to have to know more than just coding. We're going to have to know how to deploy our code on our own and how to create automated deployments. So we're not manually deploying our code out there. And that's where DevOps merges. The operations people I just told you about, the infrastructure, and the developers are merging. And I'm more and more doing what I call a DevOps job entirely. So if you go out and Google what is DevOps, which I did, I would say this particular link right here is one of the best it's kind of what they call a model, and it's kind of what it's not really. I'm talking about it as a DevOps engineer as myself, but they're talking as a kind of a company model that goes hand in hand with Agile. So I would recommend you just read this. And I don't want to go into all this detail, but what I want to tell you about is my experience. So like I said, I came from the world where all I did was develop code, and I might push it out somewhere, but somebody else handled all the servers. More and more, the way Amazon is changing things, where they're doing serverless deployments. They have something called a Lambda functions, where you can build code and push it into a Lambda, and you don't need a computer around it. It's a bizarre concept, and I'm trying to learn it, but AWS has all these tools that we need to know about that we can use that are cheaper than having a full-blown computer. So in the past, you might build an application and you needed a full-blown Windows computer with IIS running, and you would push your code to that and it would be deployed to the public and everyone could use it. But then you had to manage that server. You had to manage the updates to Windows. You had to manage the uptime. And that was a whole job for someone, right? And there's also, you had to install SQL Server for the database. So you had this big job and this big computer, and you didn't quite know how much memory it needed, and you didn't know when the updates would come, and you had to have a guy watching it. That's where Amazon Web Services comes in. It does all that for you, and it's figuring out that we don't need to have that big old machine sitting there anymore. They have these machines that you can start up, you can spin up, they call it, that use resources only when you need them. So if a web server is sitting here and no one's using it, but like 4 times a day, it doesn't need to be running. So they figure that out. And so Amazon Web Services are really good at having computers and serverless applications that only run when they're called upon. So they're being a lot more efficient, and companies no longer need to have the huge room with all these computers running with the air conditioners and all that. And that's what all this cloud computing is about, which I know you already know that. But my whole point is what our jobs are, and what my job is becoming more and more is not just development. I have to understand how DevOps works. I have to understand how to deploy code into a serverless environment. And I need to know how to automate that. That's a very important point, because in the past you would manually publish your code, and you would manually publish your code, and you'd manually publish it to all the different environments that I just told you about. Now they have what's called continuous integration and products that do it for you. And so you'll go into a company now, and don't get too mired in all these different products, but you'll go in there and they'll talk about these weird products, right? And you'll see all these names: Blue, Sentry, BR Link, CACI, all these different weird things, cloud, this and that. And all of them are doing something for you that you'll just have to learn. And I'll put it that way. My most recent job I went into, and they're using all these tools, and I don't know what they are or what they do. I have a general idea, but I have to learn them quickly. And so as a DevOps person, you're going to need to know more than coding. And I'm not trying to discourage you. It's actually interesting work. But you're going to need to know more than just being a coder and a developer. And that's what a DevOps person is. And that's more and more what I'm doing. So I will create an application, and I will also go into Amazon Web Services and create endpoints and REST APIs and Lambda functions and I'm doing all of that. There's not another guy handling that. That's me. And that is my point, is that my job as a developer is evolving past just being a developer. And that's actually a good thing, because it makes me and you even more valuable, because we're not just developers, right? We are also operations people, and we don't need to know everything. And it sounds intimidating, but it's not that bad. You just need to learn. You need to go to a site like Pluralsight or something and figure out what it is you need to know, and then learn it. And a lot of that has to do with Amazon Web Services. They do everything. They do tons and tons of stuff, and I'm using Amazon Web Services more and more. Not only that, they have tools called CloudFormation, where it will build everything for you. It will link all these different products, from the API to the S3 bucket, the folders, and it will have machine images, and it will have an entire script that you run, and it'll build everything for you when you run the script. And then when you don't want it anymore, you hit delete, and it'll unbuild everything for you. It's really interesting. CloudFormation is very powerful. I recommend you learn it. Okay, so back to DevOps. More and more, I'm becoming more of a developer and an operations person using Amazon Web Services, because I don't have to know a whole lot about how physical machines work, but I do have to know how machines work in the Amazon Web Services world, like group security and REST APIs and Lambda functions, and how to do serverless ops and things like that. So that's my whole point, is my job is involving in becoming more operations type, and what that means is AWS services. I recommend you go here and read about DevOps. And I'm not saying you need to do this. You don't have to know all this. I'm saying that's where my job and many jobs are going to be rolling into. As you go into an interview, they're going to say, yeah, you can code, you can build, but do you know how to use Amazon Web Services? Do you know how to create a machine? Do you know how to spin up a machine? Do you know about resources? Do you know, you're going to need to know more about programming. Okay, I've come to the end of what I need to say. I think I've explained DevOps. Please write a comment below. I'll try to answer it.